The early morning sun cast long shadows across Arthur Miller's front yard. At 85, he slowly made his way down his concrete pathway. His steps were careful but deliberate. His weathered hands gripped a wooden cane, not because he couldn't walk without it, but because his daughter Sarah insisted he use it after his minor fall last winter. Every morning, rain or shine, Arthur followed the same routine he'd maintained since moving into his small-town home in Cedar Glen in 1950. First came the flag-raising ceremony, a private tribute to the friends he lost during World War II. His arthritic fingers worked the rope with practiced ease, sending the stars and stripes climbing toward the brightening sky. Neighbors were used to seeing the old veteran in his dark green cardigan, pressed khaki pants, and well-polished brown shoes, an enduring habit from his Navy days. What they didn't know was that polishing those shoes every Sunday evening was Arthur's way of remembering the discipline instilled in him decades ago. Today was Monday, and like every Monday, Arthur planned to work in his garden. His rose bushes required attention. They always needed attention. That's what he loved about them. The roses gave him purpose, something to nurture since his beloved wife, Eleanor, had passed away 7 years ago. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," called Emily, the 12-year-old girl from next door, as she rode past on her bike. Arthur smiled and waved. Emily had helped him plant tulip bulbs last autumn, and every time they bloomed he thought of her youthful energy and kindness. The children on the street affectionately called him Grandpa Arthur, though he had no grandchildren of his own. Sarah and her husband had not been able to have children, but Arthur found family in his neighbors. Making his way to the garden shed, Arthur retrieved his pruning shears and gardening gloves. Eleanor had given him those gloves for their 40th anniversary, joking that maybe now he'd stop coming inside with scratched hands. Though worn and patched in several places, he couldn't bring himself to replace them. As he worked among his roses, Arthur's mind drifted back to his Navy days. He had been just 19 when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and like many young men of his generation, he enlisted immediately. The Pacific was brutal, but amid the chaos, Arthur had found peace in an unexpected place: gardening. During quiet moments on a small island where his unit was stationed, he helped local villagers tend their gardens. Kneeling in the soil under the tropical sun, he realized life could flourish even in the shadow of war. That lesson stayed with him. A car horn brought him back to the present. It was Maria, who lived at the corner with her grandkids. She honked twice, a special greeting. Arthur straightened slowly, his back protesting, and waved as her car passed. "For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." Later that evening, after tending his roses and enjoying a simple supper, Arthur sat in his armchair by the window. From there, he could see his neatly trimmed lawn and garden. The flag moved gently in the breeze, and the scene filled him with a quiet contentment. But the peace of Cedar Glen was shattered the next day. Arthur was trimming his rose bushes when he heard the distant rumble of motorcycles. He looked up, and within minutes, 5 bikes roared past his house. It wasn't unusual to see motorcycles in town, but these riders circled back and pulled into the abandoned warehouse across the street. The warehouse had been vacant for 3 years, ever since the old furniture factory moved out. Its windows were boarded up, and graffiti marred its walls. Arthur watched as more motorcycles arrived, 10, then 20. The riders wore black leather vests with a red scorpion emblem on the back. Their leader, a tall man with a shaved head and a thick beard, directed others as they broke the chains on the warehouse doors. Arthur's neighbor, Mrs. Chang, hurried past with her small dog, keeping her head down as the bikers jeered and shouted. Arthur frowned, recalling how just last week she had brought him a fresh loaf of bread. That evening, Arthur couldn't sleep. Music blasted from the warehouse until the early hours. Empty beer bottles rolled across the street, and the sound of shattering glass punctuated the night. The next morning, Arthur found his neighbour, Tom, picking up garbage from his yard. "Morning, Arthur," Tom said, his voice weary. "Did you sleep at all?" Arthur shook his head. "Not much. Did you call the police?" "3 times, Tom replied, looking over his shoulder nervously. "They said there's nothing they can do unless the bikers break the law." Arthur raised the flag at precisely 7 a.m., as he always did. A few bikers across the street watched him. One revved his engine and yelled, "Nice flag, old man!" Another rider tore across Arthur's lawn, leaving deep tracks in the grass. Arthur's heart sank as he surveyed the damage. Over the next few days, the bikers became bolder. They called themselves the Red Scorpions, and their presence changed the neighborhood. Neighborhood children stayed inside, curtains remained drawn, and even Maria stopped honking her friendly greeting. Arthur watched from his window as they hung their scorpion banner over the warehouse doors and turned the place into their clubhouse. When Arthur went out to repair the tire tracks in his lawn, 3 bikers approached. Their leader, the tall man with the beard and snake tattoo curling up his neck, sneered. "Look at this guy," he said to his companions. "Grandpa's playing gardener." Arthur straightened, gripping his cane tightly. "The name's Arthur Miller." "Well, Arthur Miller," the man mocked. "This is our territory now. You'd do well to remember that." Arthur refused to back down. "This is a community, not a playground for bullies." The leader spat on Arthur's sidewalk. "Watch yourself, old man." That night, the music from the warehouse was louder than ever. Arthur sat in the dark, gripping the armrests of his chair. On the wall hung an old photo of him in his Navy uniform, standing proudly with his shipmates. Memories of battles fought and sacrifices made stirred something deep within him. He decided it was time to act. The next morning, Arthur retrieved an old wallet from his dresser. Inside was a worn military card with a faded phone number on the back. He hadn't used it in decades, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Dialing the number, he waited as it rang. A gruff voice answered. "This is Arthur Miller," he said. "Navy, Pacific Theatre, 1943 to 1945. Service number 749321. I need some help." There was a pause, followed by, "Hold on, sailor." Another voice came on, older but commanding. "Arthur Miller? The Arthur Miller? Say no more, we'll be there." 2 hours later, the rumble of motorcycles filled the street again, but this time it wasn't the Red Scorpions. Arthur watched from his porch as a convoy of Harley-Davidsons arrived. These riders wore leather vests adorned with American flags and military patches. They parked in front of the warehouse, forming a circle around the Red Scorpions. The leader of the new group, a tall woman with silver hair tied in a braid, approached Arthur. "Senior Chief Arthur Miller?" she asked, saluting him. "I'm Captain Susan Carter, retired Air Force. We heard you needed reinforcements." The veterans stood as a united front. Their presence alone was enough to unnerve the Red Scorpions. Captain Carter addressed the bikers calmly but firmly. "You've been disrespecting this community and this veteran. That stops now. Clean up the damage you've done, apologize and leave, or we'll make sure you regret staying." The Red Scorpions tried to resist, but the veterans were relentless. Backed by their connections in law enforcement and the community, they exposed the gang's illegal activities and turned the tables. By the end of the day, the Red Scorpions were gone. The veterans stayed, helping to repair the damage and turning the warehouse into a community center. Arthur raised the flag the next morning, surrounded by new friends. For the first time in weeks, Cedar Glen felt like home again.